streaming. Good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? It is Friday. It's casual Friday, even in my mind. Hope everybody is well. We had another shooting yesterday morning. Um, my heart goes out to anyone who was related to the deceased, and I'm hoping that we can continue doing this work to help all of us heal, including those that are doing the things that cause so much pain, because that hurt people, and that is so true. And if we can work on mending our hurts, I think we'll be so much better off. But we got up a hill battle. It's tough. There are outside forces uh, that are working against our progress. So it's a hard battle, but let's keep on keeping on. It's what we do. So today, for reading, we're talking about author's purpose, which is to persuade, inform, and entertain, and then the writing or literary devices that authors use to get their point across. So today we are talking about rhetoric, and there are so many different types of rhetorical devices. It's in the 50s. We're not going to go over all of that. You're just going to have to recognize some of the main ones. You'll see them on your test. It's also it's good to recognize them to help you to understand the writer's point of view. So let's take a look at some of those right now. I'm sorry. I just gave you reading, didn't I? What we're looking at for social studies is a federal Indian policy. Now, I did something a little different this time. I assigned an attached video that you would have to watch before class because it's 20 minutes long. However, it's very interesting, and it's an easy way for you to absorb the information and what has taken place over the past 500 years since since folks came here and interacted with uh, the original people, as they want to be called. So, if you did not watch that video, I would hope that you would take the time to watch it after this lesson, because I'm going to go over a worksheet and I'll let you know what you need to know there. But it's so much easier if you go over the worksheet. All right. So let's take a look. Okay, why did you not? Okay, I'm going to slide you over here since you didn't do what I wanted you to do. All right. Actually, that is not the one I wanted to look at. I wanted to see this one because I can edit it and I've made some edits already. So let's take a look. The land that eventually became the United States has been home to tribes of people for generations. Early humans migrated to North and South America hundreds of thousands of years ago, and were still there when the first colonists arrived in the 1600s. Indeed, there were others that arrived even before that on this land, but the Native people were here. And from that point on, the Native Americans or original people fought a losing battle to preserve and maintain their tribal land. And this struggle continued into the late 1900s until the government produced um, the Indian, oh God, this is too big, the Indian policies. Okay, so let's take a look at this little box here where I have put in a definition so that we have some clarification here. So the first time that the colonists and Native Americans, when we refer to colonists, we're talking about those who came first um, to settle what we consider to be the original 13 original colonies. So we're not referring to Columbus. Okay. So that was called the encounter, and it was a massive example of cultural diffusion, which describes the spread of one's culture's practice, beliefs, and or items like food, music, or tools. And this can be among members of the same culture or to completely different cultures around the world. So if we talk about cultural diffusion, we can even look at um, dress, style of communication, and all of those things. So if you take a look at this picture, uh, what does that tell you about? I wish I could make it bigger. What does this tell you, for one thing, about possibly about culture? Um, well, we have the Indians presenting, or the natives, and as a matter of fact, there are some folk who we still refer to themselves as Indians, but again, when we want to have respect for another person's culture, um, I think it's best if you're speaking with individuals, it's best to have them tell you how they want to be called. Call me by my name. That's the ultimate sign of respect, to call me by my name. And if you're not sure, you find out, you ask, what do you call yourself? What should I call you? So the obvious is the dress, the gifts, the style of communication. He has his hand up in that manner. So those are some things that we can look at immediately. So the question here, let me move this out again because it's in the way. What did the United States introduce to interact with Native Americans? Let's find out. Historically speaking, the United States has not gotten along with the native population of North America. This was mainly due to a misunderstanding of their different cultures. That just blows my mind, y'all. Misunderstanding. If you review that video, you will see that the history of Europeans interacting with native cultures on this land, which they refer to some tribes as Turtle Island, consisted of mass murder, theft, rape, terrible things, and just taking the land. So I don't know how you refer to that as a misunderstanding, but again, when we look, and I wanted you to see this particular article because when we look at author's viewpoint, we're trying to think too, okay, well, what is coloring your point of view? And so the question then is, are we always getting what really happened or what your perception is of what happened? Okay, so to just simply refer to this as a misunderstanding is insulting. So here we have that the original people believed that the environment and the land were interrelated and could not be removed from each other. Okay. The US government, which is based on Western principles, argues that certain pieces of land could and did belong to government offices and private citizens. And not only that, it was also based on something called manifest destiny, which in which the belief was that there was a God-given right to remove or enslave people who were thought to be less than, people who did not have a soul, people who did not worship Christ. So let's talk about that too. You don't need to, well, manifest destiny you may see. And the difference in policy and opinion caused the various tribes of natives to come into constant conflict with the government. Arguments over land were frequently solved when the government signed treaties, but then later violated the terms and broke the treaties over and over and over. So here's a poster to the right, which tells you some of the original people's philosophy. When the blood in your veins returns to the sea and the earth in your bones returns to the ground, Perhaps then that you will remember that this land does not belong to you. It is you that belongs to this land. So that's a philosophy to say that we belong to the earth. The earth does not belong to us. Um, and that speaks for everyone. So Native Americans and government officials disagreed over the philosophy of land over ownership. The natives wanted to be free to hunt and gather on the land, but the government wanted to assign specific territory to individual owners. And this disagreement often led to debates in Congress. According to this image, who is the real owner in Native culture? When when the blood runs in your veins to the sea and the earth in your bones returns to the ground, perhaps that you remember that this land does not belong to you. It is you who belong to the land. So we and the land are one. We and nature are one. So according to the image, who is the real owner? You answer that question. All right. And then secondly, why didn't the Native Americans and the U.S. government get along? I think we've answered that question. There was a history of the government not honoring treaties, of not respecting people who were already here and who lived off of the land, considered themselves and the land to be one, that it was not something to be divided and sold and parsed or stolen. So here is the history of next with treaties. So these are some of the things that you'll need to know about. American Indians were the only minority in the United States with power to negotiate and sign treaties with the government. Okay, fine, they had the ability to do that, but what did it really mean? Before the Civil War, agreements like the Proclamation of 1763 and the Ohio River Valley Treaty protected land from white settlers. However, after the Civil War, the population of the United States continued to grow and it needed a place to go. So as a result, the government decided to violate the treaties it had signed with the natives and moved them to reservations. So native folk were moved from my home state, for instance, of North Carolina, all the way to the West, where they had land, where they had family, where they had homes, where they had traditions and lived off the land as the environment provided. And government officials in Andrew Johnson's and Ulysses S. Grant's administration were under pressure from powerful ranchers, rich folk, and prospectors who wanted to look for precious minerals. They wanted that land. The land was valuable. So if you look at this poster, it says Indian land for sale. And they have the picture of a person. So come and get their land. Take possession within 30 days. It is irrigated, fine land. It's irrigable, easy to be watered, has sources of water, good for grazing, dry farming, and agriculture. It's wonderful. Get a home of your own. From 1865 to 1900, the government slowly pushed the Native Americans off of their land and sold it to American citizens. And at this point, then we were under the understanding that natives were not yet citizens. And they complained that they were protected under treaties, but the government ignored them. So judging from this image, the poster we just talked about, how did the government advertise the land that they'd taken from the Indians? Well, I'll help you with this one. It looks as though it's fine to say that we've taken this land from someone else and are giving it to you because, again, you have the God-given right, and we can't remove the idea of manifest destiny, that you have the right to make these decisions over those we consider savages if they are not Christian. So what were the Native Americans able to do that no other minority could do? And why didn't the government respect those agreements? We just answered that question. So as the years went by, the Native continued to argue against the taking of their lands, and the government just didn't want to hear it anymore. By 1890, the government had broken every treaty that had been signed with the Indians and demanded they go live on land that was set aside or reserved for them. And some of the land that was reserved for them was not the irrigable land on which they originally lived that had water and was rich soil in which they could grow crops. But some of them are plopped right down into the middle of the desert. If you ever travel coast to coast, you'll be able to see where some of the reservations were set down. By this point, the government only saw American Indians as obstacles to white settlement. Racist and greedy government officials believed that white settlers who built farms and grew cash crops could generate the money, more money for the economy than the spirited Indians. So the Indians were locked out of the economy to begin with. And so they said, well, you're not contributing, so we're going to take from you. And we see those types of practices still today. So let's take a look at this map of Native American land starting in 1775. This one I can't read. I believe that's 1860. And I don't know what that is. And this is by 1994. So as you look today, this is what's left. And so what did the government force the natives to do in 1890? Well, we answered that question as well. And some natives agreed to move to reservations, but most resisted the movement. And the conflict between the natives and the government's forces spread throughout the Western territories and threatened the fragile peace that had been established after the Civil War. In order to force the Native Americans to stop fighting, the government came up with a plan to break their connections with the lands they lived on. In the late 1800s, the government introduced policies to weaken tribal ties that connected the different groups in order to prevent them from working together. So if the Indians weren't able to unite against the advancing U.S. Army, they'd be easier to push off their land. Native soldiers, like the Lakota people, however, were fierce warriors that worked together to fight the U.S. Army. The military needed to divide them into smaller groups before it could defeat them. And so that military tactic was known as divide and conquer. And there is an ancient ruler. Okay, so if you're on looking at the test now, and it says, what ancient ruler used this tactic to defeat his enemies? Benjamin Franklin, Gandhi, George W. Bush, or Julius Caesar? Well, if we're talking about ancient times, can we say Benjamin Franklin was in ancient times? No. Past, yes. Gandhi, in the more recent past, yes. George W. Bush, the most recent past. Julius Caesar would be the answer. And how did the government plan to defeat the most powerful native tribes? Well, we just said it. And then finally, in order to weaken the ties between the tribes, the government passed the Dawes Act. I would remember this. You'll see that word in February of 1887, and that gave the president power to seize native land by force. And then if any Indian was allowed to stay on the land, they had to adopt American culture. They set up schools for Indian children where they were re-educated to assimilate, to join, blend in to the greater culture. There are stories of great abuse and trying to make these children learn by force. And if you look at them in this picture, they're, dressed in the little pinafores, the little dresses from the day. And so what did the Dawes Act do and why was it created? That's all. But again, that's pretty much the history of government policy toward United States government policy toward the Native American or original people or the indigenous people. That's pretty much it, and know what basically was involved. And it's not really complicated. Again, if you want it cemented sealed the deal in your mind, watch that video. So that's all I have for now. I see you again at 11:30, where we will take on reading. All right, you all take care.